Hi everyone, Chris Heater and Summit here from the Wild Institute. Settle in, I'll tell you a story. It's time for more sled dog wisdom, don't you think? All you need to know to really understand the story are a couple things. First of all, I'm talking about sled dogs that are Alaskan Huskies, which is a mixed breed of northern breed dogs. And what that means is they love to run and they love to pull. More than anything in the world, that's what they want to do. For that reason, they are really good escape artists. So when you're designing a pen for your sled dogs, you got to be really thoughtful about it. So what we had, our setup, is we had a dirt floor on the pen. We had 6-foot-high chain link fence, and we buried railroad tie all the way along the boundary inside the pen, buried it with dirt on top to help keep them in. That's how hard you have to work to keep them, because they just really want to go, which is a lovely thing, and that's why dog sledding is such a beautiful joining together, right, of something they love to do, and we meet them in that environment, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful, joyful thing. This is when Summit sighs, because he's not a sled dog. We've tried him pulling me on skis, ski joring, and let's just say he's not a natural. His nose leads him far more than his feet, and we have been on some crazy adventures trying to do some ski joring, but that's for another day. So that's the background to know about Alaskan Huskies as I tell you a story about Scrapper. Now, for a lot of dogs, not just Huskies, as they get to kind of middle age, sometimes they develop a fear of storms, even if they hadn't had it in their earlier years. And that was happening for Scrapper, but we didn't know it. And so there was a big storm, one of those first early storms of spring, and lots of thunder, lots of rain, lots of lightning, and we went out to the dog yard right away after the storm to check on the dogs. And what we found was way inside the pen was a Scrapper-sized hole. She had managed to dig through really hard clay all the way under under the railroad tie, under the chain link fence, up and out, and she was gone. And that's not a good situation. Much as they love us, it isn't about that for them. Once they get loose, it's like a switch gets flipped and they are just off and running. So we started looking far and wide, calling her, getting in the car because we know how far she can run and how fast. Didn't find her. We pitched a tent and slept out at the dog yard in case she circled back by night so we could get her. And we kept looking and we didn't see her. And we put up signs and we told everybody in the neighborhood to be on the lookout for Scrapper. And on the third day of just heart-wrenching, stop everything, look for the dog, a neighbor drove up and said, "I think I just saw her over in the farmer's field." So I took off at a run. My partner got a car and went around the other side in case she had kept moving. And I did see her off in the field. So I started walking toward her. This isn't a time to run because she's all about that. She's so wired, and she's probably now in even more kind of hyper alert panic mode, having been on her own for 3 days. So I saw her and I was walking slowly toward her and eventually got to where she was on a little bit of a rise, and the farmer's field had this big dip in it, and it had rained and rained and rained those 3 days earlier. So it was a mud pit. And as I got closer to her, she was like this. She hadn't bolted yet, but she certainly was considering it. And I knew that at that point, I was too tall. I was too high up for her. And the place where we met happened to be right in the bottom of that muddy area. And I knew what I had to do. I walked into it very slowly, and I knelt down. It was about knee-deep mud, and kneeling into it got me up to high on my thighs, and knelt there and stayed. And gently called her name. As she came up, she plunked her way through the mud a little bit and sniffed from a distance. And as tempted as I was to reach out and grab her, I knew that wasn't the right move. I could have startled her, she could have taken off, and we'd have been back to square one. So I stayed kneeling in the mud. And eventually, talking gently to her, she made her way over to me and sniffing. And then I think there was enough between my voice and between my smell, that switch flipped back. And then she was like, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you. Lick, lick, lick," jump on me. And I hugged her. And oh, what a reunion that was. What a relief. Oh, what a relief to have found her again. Then, of course, I realized I had not brought a leash in my haste. So here I was now with mud up to my thighs. And Scrapper, who was kind of a white-colored dog, was up to her chest. Just looked like a different colored dog. But there we were, and I had her, and that's what mattered. So I held her collar and I bent over and we walked the 1.5 miles back home, and it was such a relief and a joyful thing when she was able to get back into the way she is. Sweet, sweet Scrapper who's so happy and joyful. What does that story have to do with right now? I think it applies in a number of different ways. First of all, we're being told, at least I am, by many different sources to try to stay positive, to have hope, to stay optimistic. And I think I'm all in for that. I think that's great. And that fits unless you're not feeling it, right? If you are feeling really fearful and you're trying to pretend to be positive, it's just not real. It doesn't help. You're trying to talk yourself out of something that's not lined up with how you're feeling in the moment. So what Scrapper needed and what all of us need from one another at different times right now is reassurance, right? That it's okay to feel what you're feeling. Reassurance is a little bit slippery. Many of us, we think of reassurance and that sounds like, oh, it's going to be okay. And I'm sure all of you, including myself, have experienced being in just a freaked out mode about something and someone says, hey, you know what, Chris, it's going to be okay. And I think, oh yeah, you're right. And I can get calmed down again. But sometimes, and I know you know what I'm talking about, when we are, or I am, in a heightened freaked out mode and someone says, oh, it's going to be okay, it's not okay. That person does not get it. And all that does is amp me up even more. So we want to be a little bit more flexible and giving and generous and curious as we interact with one another in this time. Reassurance can also be kneeling in the muck and just holding still, but being with someone in that heightened state. This is a fearful, crazy time. And yes, we can attain hope and optimism and positivity. We can visit it. I don't know as we can live in it all the time. But as we work with one another, if you're working remotely, if this is with a loved one in very close quarters right now, we can give each other the gift of reassurance and give them time and space while we hold it for them to reset, to realign, to get back in touch with who we are at our core. Our wild side would be what I would say. Remember that wild is who you are. It's who you are at your core, underneath any beliefs that you have that may or may not be true, underneath the roles that we play. It's just you, beautiful, messy, natural you. And there's no need to fix it. There's no need to improve it. It's just who you are. And being wild is having the courage to bring the gift of all of who you are to all of what you do. So when we are out of alignment, not feeling our wild nature, whatever that may be, whether that's a really calm spirit or a really boisterous spirit, doesn't matter. When we are not feeling lined up with who we are, the best gift that we can give to one another is just kneeling in the muck together and being there and holding space and bearing witness, as in this case Scrapper finds her way back to her centeredness, to her way of being in the world. We can do this. It's hard. This is a time for a major reset for all of us individually and frankly for the world. So we can continue to learn from the wild ones, and my teachers, best of all, are always sled dogs because they walk that fine line between the wild nature of wolf and the domestic nature of beloved dog friends. There's more stories ahead. Summit and I are here for you. Look forward to talking to you again. Take good care of yourselves.